Hello and welcome back to The Bunker. Thanks to everyone who tuned in last week. We've got a lot more questions to get through this week, so let's crack on with your questions. Thanks.
What's your top tip about things not to forget if you're preparing for a lockdown? Something like a bunker or prepper hideaway.
That's a really good and horrible question. I did a lot of research on different durations of like bunker lockdown. So these are when preppers just cut themselves off entirely from the rest of the world and have to be self-sustaining. So they're going to be away from the world for 3 months or a year or 3 years. Well, to cut a long story short, the one thing you need is water more than anything else, because we drink almost one of these. This is 5 litres of water, a 5 litre water container. We drink 3.7 litres of water every single day. Our bodies are made of water. The earth is covered in water. Unfortunately, the water that we can drink is fairly limited. We can't drink rainwater really without sterilising it. So 3 years worth of water storage is a lot of space. You'd have an entire house full of canisters of water. Of course, water purifying systems would be the solution for that. That's the big one. If we don't have access to water coming through the taps, because in any civilizational collapse, the water purification systems go down, basically. The incredible number of water-bound diseases that you can get as soon as you're cut off from the water mains and have to get water by other means. These are diseases really that we've got rid of in the 20th century, but they come creeping straight back. They include E. coli, cholera, hepatitis, dysentery, and worms. Because when you have a civilizational collapse, you'll find that the people who work in the water purification plants, they're not going to be there to keep the things running. So basically the sewage treatment plants overflow and all of that starts entering into the mains water supply stream. So you end up with sewage coming out through your taps. Other things, preppers are always forgetting absolute basics. So, your reading glasses is one thing, and reading material when you're in lockdown and you're not got any TV and any media, you're going to need, you need some books to be reading. And the most important book of all is to have a home doctor manual, because you're going to be not going to any hospitals. Hospitals in any civilizational collapse are always the epicenter of chaos and need and the spreading of diseases and centres of violence. We saw a bit of the meltdown of the hospital system, even in COVID-19. But when you end up with a situation of lawlessness in a society that's collapsing, you really have to stay away from hospitals. So you've got to do everything yourself, including home surgery.
Pick up those scissors, doctor. What? Here goes. X marks the spot. Ah! We just jabbed it in! He's fucking knee! Woo! No! Don't wiggle it around!
Talking of home surgery, never forget duct tape. There are about 50 uses of duct tape, which preppers know all about. They involve things like you could start a fire. It's a great kindling material because it's flammable. You can use it for a sling. You can use it when you've got a broken leg or a broken finger. You just gaffer tape the thing up. Use it for mending clothes. When you have a shallow cut that's quite long, you can make butterfly stitches with the gaffer tape. Or if you've got a really deep wound, you can fasten both of the sides together, again without stitches, just by binding your limb in gaffer tape, and everything will heal together within the gaffer tape enclosure. Also, you can use gaffer tape for restraining, tying up someone who's tried to break into your bunker to steal all of your stuff, including your gaffer tape, of course. So you use it to make airtight spaces if there's any airborne bacteria or viruses that you're having to protect yourself from.
And that's how you set up a do-it-yourself pandemic containment room using some 4mm plastic sheeting.
So duct tape is a kind of one-size-fits-all survivalist bit of kit. I think there's too many things to tell you about in the do's and don'ts and must-haves and must-have-nots of the prepper list for the apocalypse. So I'll come back to it after we've answered another question. Thanks.
What's the role of culture in a pandemic? Can can art and stories make us see things differently? Or are we just looking for an escape?
Well, there have been some newspaper articles over the last few months, which have pretty much said that what we need in culture is to have escapism, to have fun and fantasy, just to help us get through this really hard time. And what we don't want any culture that's being made about the pandemic. That's just too miserable and depressing. And oddly enough, this was very much like the cultural attitude around the time of the 1918 pandemic. If you look back, 50 million people died, but there's barely any record in culture of the pandemic, because there was this attitude at the time. It was largely a product of modernism and also the sort of incoming hedonism of the roaring 20s after the pandemic, that they basically just had to sweep aside the past, forget about that whole horror that we went through with World War I and the pandemic that was intricately tied up in the whole thing, the huge partying years of the roaring 20s. I think it was F. Scott Fitzgerald that said, the buildings are bigger, the dances are wilder, the parties are louder, the alcohol flows more. It's just a never-ending sort of huge champagne celebration. So there was a kind of amnesia hangover, if you like, after the Roaring Twenties. So there was this big movement to completely sweep away the past. It was seen as being part of a sort of imperialist horror, the Victorian era, World War I, and also the pandemic. So the modernist attitude that came in was, we'll start society again from a carte blanche, from a blank slate. We'll design society anew. So from the 1920s, you've got the birth of modernist architecture. Modernist architect Le Corbusier's plans for Paris were to demolish most of the centre of old Paris to replace it with high-rise skyscrapers and modernist tower blocks in housing schemes. The idea, again, of a blank slate, of a tabula rasa, starting again from scratch. All the kind of modernist philosophy, which is that you'll create a kind of new society and then a new mankind, really. You've also got the connections with the growth of communism worldwide. Vladimir Lenin talking about the new Soviet man. They were going to engineer a new kind of human being and a new kind of society. So with this blank slate philosophy, this rejection of the past that you have within modernism in the 1920s, almost nothing really remained of the 1918 pandemic in terms of culture. Apart from probably 5 works of fiction and a handful of paintings, is really all that is left to show that the pandemic of 1918 actually existed. So I thought it was important not to do that this time, because there's even been, calls in newspapers saying that oh yeah, we're going to have another Roaring Twenties when this is all done. It seems inappropriate to sort of go, yay, let's party, for the next 10 years. Do we really just want, as the cultural gatekeepers are telling us just now, do we just want to be stupefied and entertained, and do we just want to forget about the pandemic and kind of kill time until it's done? So we want fantasies, we want escapism. That's really all the culture that we're going to be making. And I think that would be a great shame. My attitude on this is that we've lived through such an extraordinary set of transformations within our time that it would be almost an insult to the 2.4 million people who've died to just sweep all of this away into the waste bin of history. So I think that it's really important that we actually make culture that explores the depths of what we've been through. I mean, when you think about all of the things that have changed since the COVID-19 pandemic began, the way we think about globalization, the way we think about nations, the way we think about the family and the extended family, the way that we behave with our neighbours. People who've been having an affair for years suddenly realised, they can't go and see their lover without breaking quarantine rules. Young people have had to, suffer the fact that, they can't party and be as hedonistic as they want to. People have been forced to live in extraordinary proximity. It's ended some marriages. It might have even, created some new ones. So the devastation's been profound, but at the same time, we've discovered some incredible things. People have been forced into all kinds of social situations that haven't had to deal with before. Like the extended family has really made a return, with 2 or 3 generations having to live with each other in the same house, for better or worse. Such a lot of adaptability as well. I know professional people who've just said, okay, I'm not going to bust a gasket trying to keep going as I normally am. I'm going to down tools and deliver food to old folk who need it. And that's just an extraordinary thing. I even know of an extraordinary example of a millennial couple who for year after year had been postponing having kids because the time wasn't right. The material necessities weren't there. They weren't both working. They weren't making enough money. They hadn't got enough space. And then when the pandemic hit about 6 months in, they just said, look, there's never going to be a right time to have a kid. We're going to be broke and we're just going to have to put up with it. So let's make a baby right now. There's never going to be a right time. So that's a huge transformation, for that couple, but also for a generation of people who've had to postpone their ambitions for 2 or 3 years. How awful that must be to be starting out in your career and to face that sort of cataclysmic stop to things. So I think we've been through an immense experience, and it would be a crime, really, against humanity if we weren't to make as much culture, as much beautiful and profound and even funny and resourceful culture out of the pandemic experience. So back to the question of the objects that preppers really need and really often forget in their preparations for their bunkers. For me, also, this is quite funny. For any period of time, I suffer from terrible indigestion for most of my life, so I would need a big supply of antacids, as well as, of course, a large amount of food. We have to have 1,200 calories of food every day, which is about 2 bags of nuts or 2 bars of chocolate, or about 10 sardines. It's not actually that much. If we don't get those 1,200 calories, we start eating up our fat deposits in our bodies. We can live for about 3 weeks without any food. So food's not the biggest priority in the short term. Another crucial bit of survival kit is your survival blanket. Never let it be said that survivalists are tinfoil hat conspiracy theorists. Other funny things that preppers forget in their big long lists that they've been making over the years. They've got the batteries, they've got the battery chargers, they've got the hand powered torches and all that sort of stuff. They've got the Dettol, the bleach. One of the main things that they actually forget is condoms, strangely enough, because they forget that actually there's going to be a time where they are going to have some kind of intimacy again once they're out of the actual panic state. So there you would end up with a situation with preppers in a 3-year lockdown would end up having unprepared babies would suddenly start appearing, and that would be another mouth to feed, and that would certainly feed into your rations. Another thing that's really, really important, it's kind of horrible to say, but you have to work out what you're going to do with all your waste. Another thing as well is forms of culture that are not electricity based. So any musical instruments you have are hugely important part of the prepper repertoire, because as I've said, you only need to eat for 10 minutes every day a couple of bags of peanuts and some chocolate and some fish, and you can survive for a long period of time. So what do you do with all the other hours of the day when you're just quietly hiding away from the rest of the world?
Ewan! I am starving. Are you going to make dinner?
I'm just in here doing the video.
I'm so hungry. You've been in there for like 6 hours. You gonna please come out?
Okay, no worries. Okay, I'm coming. Okay, bye. Bye.